I'm starting up a new D&D game to play test my monthly Patreon adventures. I started making a bunch of notes and very quickly realized that I needed to do a session 0. I consider my job as a dungeon master not just to know the rules and run the game, but also to make sure that my players are having a good time, and I guess also make sure that I'm having a good time too. We're all having a good time together. And if you start thinking too much about that responsibility, it feels like it's a lot of pressure. And honestly, that makes me kind of nervous. But I have found out that you can alleviate a lot of that pressure and get rid of the nerves by having a session 0. So what exactly is session 0? Well, you get together with your players just like you normally would, but you don't actually play. Instead, you introduce the story, you go over some rules, and you make characters. It's just a nice way to get the players excited while also leveling their expectations and making sure everybody's on the same page. So how do I run my session 0? Well, typically the first thing is figuring out a schedule, but I do that ahead of time to find out if the people playing with me actually want to play. So we've already figured out when we're gonna meet, where we're gonna meet, how long we'll be playing for, what game we're using, all of that stuff. And actually my session 0 is scheduled at the same time for the same amount of time at our regularly scheduled time. Does that make sense? So anyway, schedule figured out. Now session 0 is all about setting expectations. So the very first thing I'm gonna do is figure out what kind of game we're playing. I don't mean what system of rules we're using, that's already figured out. I mean, I want us to figure out the tone of the game. And it's not just me dictating it, it's us figuring it out all together. So the very first thing I do is ask a few questions to the players. What's their favorite type of tabletop RPG to play? What kind of character were they in the last game that they played? And then what kind of adventure did they go on? Just a brief recap. And if they haven't played a tabletop RPG before, maybe ask them what kind of video games are their favorites, or movies, or books. This is all just to get an idea of if they like dark, gritty fantasy or more lighthearted, whimsical kind of story. All of this just helps me figure out what the tone of the game is going to be. I should also say that it doesn't have to be one way or the other. You can have light, whimsical moments of exploring a fairy forest and also super dark demons biting people heads off moments as well, if that's the stuff that your players are interested in. The other thing I like to just straight up ask is, what are the players' like ratios of combat to exploration to role-playing? You know, there's going to be some players that just want to kill monsters, and then there's going to be some players that only really care about role-playing and developing their characters. And that too can be a big mix of all of those things. Actually, it should be a mix of all of those things. You know, so if you're a player that loves combat, maybe make the combat stuff a little bit more interesting for them so they get to shine. And then the players that love the role-playing stuff, you know, give them encounters that allow them to go crazy with fun role-playing. Okay, so the next part is super important, and that is establishing some rules. Now, all of my rules revolve around making sure that everybody at the table is gonna have a fun time. You know, I guess the big overarching rule is that no one gets to tread on anybody else's fun. You know, it can be simple rules like no player versus player, no evil characters, splitting the party is okay, but no lone wolf shenanigans or anything like that. Or sometimes it needs to be a little more nuanced to make sure that everybody feels safe and comfortable at the table. So I really like to set expectations by giving my game a rating, like a movie rating. You know, is it PG or PG-13, rated R, that sort of thing, but then also adding in the layer of, you know, like it's rated R for violence and language, but there's no sexually explicit content or anything like that. And this is the point where it's really, really important to check in with your players, make sure everybody's comfortable. You know, if one person wants to run a PG-13 game instead of an R, that means you got to run a PG-13 game. I also let the players know that if there's any concerns or anything like that, they can always contact me privately. So everybody's got my phone number, can message me on Discord. I often remind them of this every session so they can always message me while we're playing. And really, this just goes back to my responsibility as a dungeon master to make sure everybody's having fun, because if they don't feel safe, they're not having fun. Okay, now on to the fun part. It's time to introduce the story. So in this game, my players are the heroes of Dragontown. They've saved the day, but a darker evil lurks underground, and the dragon mayor Xanthoriel has tasked the players to investigate the caverns below Dragontown. So this is a really, really simple setup. You might have a little bit more of an introduction planned out than that, but the point is I like to start the players out on their quest. We haven't really figured out how they all know each other yet, but we do know that they all have a common motivation. In this case, going underground and figuring out what's going on with the darkness below. Again, I like to check in with all the players, make sure that they're not hitting their funny bone on the back of their chair, make sure that they're all feeling good, happy with this introduction, and agreeing to go on this quest together. At this point, it's time to explain a few rules, more game mechanic type stuff. So I'm actually not going to be playing Dungeons & Dragons. I'm going to be running a game called 5 Torches Deep. It's similar to D&D, but there's some differences. So now is the time to sort of fill in the players, again, level their expectations, let them know what kind of game we're playing. And if my players haven't played an RPG before, I would start super simple, maybe give just a very basic example of play. So I would say like, okay, I'm the DM, I'm going to set the scene for you all, and then you're going to tell me what your characters would do. And if there's some sort of risk involved in the thing you want to do, then I'll tell you what to roll. You roll some dice, and then we'll see what happens. Again, you're just leveling expectations, keeping it really simple. I guess also at this point would be a good time to talk about any house rules. Usually this is the type of stuff that I save for when it comes up in play, just because I don't like to overwhelm everybody with rules. I don't honestly really like thinking about rules all that much, but if there's important stuff you want your players to know about, now is the time, because the next step is where they get to have a lot of fun and be creative. It's time to create characters. Now, in my session 0, I like for us all to sit down together and make characters all at the same time. I usually start off by asking what type of characters somebody wants to play. You know, what type of class they want to be is a good place to start. You know, the whole point is you just want each player to feel like they have their moments to shine, but also work well together as a team. So I like to go down the list, roll stats one at a time. And when I say roll one at a time, I mean, okay, everybody roll strength, we're good. Okay, everybody roll dexterity, we're good. Everybody roll constitution, so on, so on. I find that this is a good way to introduce the game, talk a little bit more about the rules, keeping it light still, and it makes it really easy to check in with the players as you're going through this process. And all the players know what everyone else has going on at the same time. So while we're creating characters, I like to ask the players questions about their characters. You know, what did they do before they became an adventurer? If they roll super high strength, how did they get so strong? Did they inherit that longbow, or did they buy it, or did they make it themselves? I don't expect the players to have answers to all of these questions. It is perfectly fine if they say, I don't know. But by asking these questions, it gets their brain going. It gets them thinking more about the character's story than the stats on the page. And I want their brains thinking about characters and backstories, because now it's time to figure out how all of these characters know each other. Sometimes they come up with cool ideas while they're creating their characters, and other times they have no idea and I gotta throw out some suggestions. I think this step is super important because if the players know that their characters are a group that is together and they all know each other, it's much easier for them to get invested in this quest that I introduced at the beginning of the session. Other thing I really like to do to get them invested is have each player describe an NPC that lives in this world that their character knows and has some sort of relationship to. It helps them feel invested in this place, but it also gives me a very easy way to hook them into the game. So maybe one of the players has a brother that lives in town and the brother's gone missing. They gotta go find the brother. What happens when they find the brother? I don't know, but it's gonna be fun. And of course, if they can't think of anything when I put them on the spot, I say it's always okay to message me later and it'll get worked out before session 1. And actually, that reminds me of the other thing that I love doing is messaging each of the players individually on their own after session 0, but before session 1. So I've had a little bit of time to think about their characters, how they're gonna fit into the story, and basically I just give them something cool. Maybe it's a common magic item, maybe it's some sort of secret about the world that the other players don't know about, or maybe it's a whole quest, side quest, that they are gonna go on that the other players don't know about. And this makes everybody feel extra special and just gets them even more invested in the game. So yeah, that's it. That's how I run my session 0. A lot of times, especially as DMs, we just want to jump into the game, but I find it really, really important to sort of level the expectations, make sure everybody's on the same page. The players always have a lot of fun creating characters. And yeah, I just think it's a really important first step, especially if you're going to have an ongoing campaign with a bunch of friends. So let me know what you do for your session 1. If you have any crazy house rules or important things you like to go over, down in the comments. If you would like to support the channel and check out the adventures that I'm going to be running for this group, there's a link down in the description to my Patreon. I'm putting out a new adventure every single month. I just released the first adventure, Flick Silverpin's Guide to the Shadespeare Mountains. I'm super, super excited with how it turned out, and I'm super, super excited about next month's adventure that I've already started working on. Okay, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!